3 weeks, America has been asking what happened to Savannah Guthrie's mom. One of those following this case closely, Dr. Phil, who spoke with Stephen Fabian about the status of the investigation.
Like the rest of America, Dr. Phil says the disappearance of Savannah Guthrie's mom has left him baffled. What makes this kidnapping unusual to you?
One thing a kidnapper wants to do is get rid of their abductee as quickly and quietly as they possibly can, because it's very high risk to hold, concerning that they've not aggressively tried to monetize what they have, which is Nancy Guthrie.
Dr. Phil, an expert in forensic psychology, says most kidnappings last only a few days.
You have to have somewhere to keep them, right? Someone has to monitor them the entire time. They have to be fed, and if they have medical needs, that has to be attended to, because they're of little or no value if they are deceased.
As these weeks go by, there are a lot of theories out there. One is, could this be some sort of revenge plot on Savannah Guthrie?
That would surprise me if that was the case, but those of us that are in the media, we're always subject to that.
When I watched that Ring camera footage, my gut reaction was, oh, wow.
The holster, all of these things, professionals don't do that. They're very careful. They detect where cameras are ahead of time.
Dr. Phil is covering the case on his true crime podcast, The Real Story.
Somebody has the information to solve this crime with one phone call.
To whoever has her.
What did you take away from Savannah's most recent video?
It is never too late to do the right thing.
I think Savannah Guthrie has done about as perfect a job in managing this situation from day one as you possibly could do. She has been non-threatening. She hasn't been intimidating. She wants her mother back.
And it's never too late.
As of today, investigators have received more than 30,000 tips in the search for Nancy Guthrie.
When Dr. Phil McGraw spoke about the Nancy Guthrie case, he didn't claim inside knowledge or secret evidence. What he offered instead was something just as powerful, a structured, expert-driven explanation of what most likely happened, based on behavior patterns, timelines, and what has not happened since Nancy vanished. Dr. Phil began by focusing on one uncomfortable truth: the absence of proof of life. In cases where a kidnapping is genuine, kidnappers almost always provide verification, audio, or video, or specific demands that only the victim could confirm. In Nancy Guthrie's case, none of that has surfaced in a way investigators could verify. According to Dr. Phil, this silence is not neutral. It is meaningful. He also addressed the early narrative that framed the disappearance as an organized abduction. Experts, he said, look for consistency: vehicles, communications, financial trails, digital footprints. Instead, what appears in the public record are gaps, contradictions, and unanswered questions. Dr. Phil stressed that when stories change or key details don't align, investigators shift their focus from who took her to what scenario best fits the evidence. Another critical point was timing. Dr. Phil highlighted how the hours immediately after Nancy disappeared were decisive, and how certain opportunities to preserve clarity may have been lost. In his analysis, that doesn't automatically assign guilt, but it does complicate the truth-finding process. Striking was his conclusion: this case may not be about a stranger at all. Experts often find that the most complex disappearances involve people within the victim's orbit, those with access, knowledge, or motive. Dr. Phil was careful with his words, but the implication was clear. Investigators should look inward, not outward. This revelation reignited public interest and debate, setting the stage for expert reactions that would soon follow. If you want clear, say fact-based breakdowns of the biggest true crime cases, like and subscribe to Deadlock Justice. True Crime. Your support helps keep these investigations in the spotlight. Following the comments made in Chapter 1, criminal psychologists and former investigators began weighing in, not with rumors, but with pattern analysis. Their focus was not on sensational claims, but on what the known facts suggest when placed beside decades of similar cases. One former FBI behavioral analyst emphasized that disappearances initially framed as kidnappings are often reassessed once the emotional fog clears. The expert explained that real abductions tend to generate urgency from the perpetrators, deadlines, escalating demands, or proof that the victim is alive. In Nancy Guthrie's case, the lack of sustained, verifiable contact continues to stand out as a critical anomaly. Another expert turned attention to behavior after the disappearance. According to crisis response specialists, people closest to a missing person usually follow one of two paths: relentless public engagement or guarded silence driven by legal advice. What complicates the Guthrie case is that reactions appeared uneven, moments of urgency followed by long stretches of quiet. Experts caution that this does not equal guilt, but it does demand explanation. Digital forensics analysts also weighed in, pointing to the absence of random digital noise. In modern kidnappings, phones ping towers, burner devices appear, and financial systems are tested. Here, those signs are faint or missing. One analyst described it bluntly. It looks less like an active criminal operation and more like a scenario that stalled early. Perhaps the most debated point involved access. Experts consistently return to one principle: opportunity is rarely accidental. Whoever knows routines, vulnerabilities, and timing holds a decisive advantage. That reality has pushed investigators to look beyond the idea of a faceless criminal and toward people within Nancy's daily world, without naming or accusing anyone publicly. As these expert perspectives circulated, public opinion shifted from shock to scrutiny. The question was no longer who took Nancy, but which explanation fits the evidence without forcing it. As expert reactions continued to circulate, one theme kept resurfacing, and it was not something anyone said out loud. It was the silence. In the Nancy Guthrie case, that silence became one of the most debated elements among analysts who reviewed the timeline without emotion or assumption. Experts pointed out that silence in criminal cases can mean many things. It can signal fear, strategy, legal caution, or the simple absence of answers. But what made this case different was where the silence appeared. After the initial shock, there were long stretches without verifiable updates, no confirmed contact, no escalation, and no independent signs that Nancy was alive. According to analysts, when a case stalls this early, investigators are forced to reassess the foundational premise. Former law enforcement officials explained that in real kidnapping scenarios, time works against the perpetrators. Silence reduces leverage. It invites law enforcement pressure. Because of that, kidnappers typically act again and again. Here, the silence didn't increase tension, it dissolved it. That alone, experts say, shifts investigative thinking. Another focus was control of information. Analysts noted that much of what the public believed about the case originated from a narrow set of early accounts. When narratives depend heavily on limited sources and are not reinforced by external proof, they become fragile. Investigators are trained to test those narratives, not protect them. Experts were careful to avoid naming suspects or assigning blame. Instead, they framed the issue as structural. When evidence fails to evolve, the story must be reevaluated. This doesn't mean the truth is darker than expected, but it does mean it may be closer than originally believed. By the end of this phase, the case had entered a different category. It was no longer driven by urgency, but by analysis. Not by fear, but by questions that refused to disappear. As expert commentary continued to shape public understanding, investigators quietly did what they often do when a case refuses to move forward. They revisited the beginning. According to specialists familiar with long-term investigations, this moment is critical. It's when authorities stop asking what happened next and start asking what if the first assumption was wrong. Dr. Phil's remarks amplified this shift. Experts noted that early narratives, once established, can unintentionally limit how evidence is interpreted. In the Nancy Guthrie case, the initial framing as a kidnapping influenced everything that followed: search strategies, media messaging, and public expectations. But when proof of life never materialized and expected criminal behavior failed to appear, the foundation of that narrative weakened. Criminal analysts emphasize that reevaluation does not mean failure, it means maturity. Many high-profile cases have only moved forward once investigators were willing to challenge their earliest conclusions. In this case, that meant considering scenarios that were once viewed as unlikely or uncomfortable. Another point raised by experts involved sequence. If events don't unfold in the order typical of a crime, investigators must ask why. In Nancy's case, actions taken after her disappearance did not always align with the level of danger initially described. Experts were careful to say this does not assign guilt, but it does complicate the original storyline. The shift also changed how evidence was weighed. Instead of asking whether facts supported a kidnapping, investigators began asking which explanation required the fewest assumptions. This approach often leads cases away from dramatic theories and toward more grounded, if unsettling, possibilities. By the end of this chapter, the case stood at a crossroads. The story the public had accepted was no longer treated as fixed. It was being tested, carefully, quietly, and with renewed seriousness. For true crime coverage that follows evidence rather than narratives, like and subscribe to Deadlock Justice True Crime. We stay focused on facts, even when they challenge what we thought we knew. By this stage of the discussion, experts were careful to draw a firm line between what can be proven and what can responsibly be inferred. The goal was not to replace one unverified narrative with another, but to define the boundaries of the evidence as it currently stands in the Nancy Guthrie case. Or specialists agreed on one point: the available facts do not strongly support a prolonged, organized kidnapping. In cases like that, investigators expect momentum, communications, escalating demands, mistakes by perpetrators, or traceable activity. Instead, the case shows stagnation. According to experts, stagnation suggests either an event that ended quickly or a scenario that never progressed beyond its initial claim. Dr. Phil's analysis echoed this restraint. He emphasized that conclusions must be built on absence as much as presence. When critical elements never appear, despite time, technology, and public attention, experts are allowed to say that certain theories become less likely. This does not reveal exactly what happened, but it narrows the field. Another area experts discussed was risk exposure. Criminal behavior tends to increase risk over time. Every contact, every demand, every movement creates opportunities for detection. In this case, the lack of ongoing risk-taking raised questions. Experts described it as behavior that avoids scrutiny rather than challenges it. Importantly, analysts rejected sensational shortcuts. They did not name suspects or assert outcomes. Instead, they framed the situation as unresolved but constrained. Some possibilities fit the evidence more comfortably than others, and that matters in professional analysis. By the end of this chapter, the message was clear. Experts are not claiming certainty, but they are no longer treating all explanations as equal. The evidence has weight, and it leans away from the original assumptions. For careful, responsible, true crime analysis that respects facts over hype, like and subscribe to Deadlock Justice True Crime. We follow the evidence, even when it leads to difficult conclusions.
Boy, we'll never solve this case. And then the next day we solve it. Here's one that I go, man, I wish we could solve it in the next 10 minutes. It may be the next 10 days, the next 10 months, or worse.
Wow. The next 10 months or worse. Andres Gutierrez, as he has been for so many days, faithfully at his post in Tucson. What's the latest?
Major, there have been no huge developments here on day 18 of the search. However, we are getting some of the nuances in this very complex investigation. This afternoon, the Pima County Sheriff's Department says that the only video that we have seen that the FBI shared with us of that man at Nancy Guthrie's front door is the only usable and video that the engineers over at Google have been from her property. One we saw getting plucked from the rooftop by FBI agents on Friday the 6th. They are still working to try to see if there's any usable video. They are hopeful that the very smart engineers over at Google will be able to help them do that and extract video that they can share with the public and hopefully help them churn up additional leads. They have not ruled out that the person that you saw in that doorbell video didn't work without an accomplice. So they believe that this person may have also had a second individual who ended up snatching Nancy in the middle of the night. Another big name that law enforcement are working with is Walmart. They are trying to identify the man in that video by what he had. We know that the backpack, that black Ozark Trail hiker backpack, is sold exclusively at the retail giant. Authorities say that the company has turned over purchase records with actions. FBI agents are also visiting local gun stores here in Tucson, trying to identify where that guy bought that firearm and that holster that he had close to his groin, not by his side. And a lot of firearms experts saying that it just shows how much of an amateur he was in carrying out this crime. There is also DNA evidence that was found inside Nancy's house that doesn't belong to her or her relatives, and so they're trying to figure out who it does belong to, and perhaps they could eventually enter that into CODIS, the national FBI database, as well as commercial genealogy databases. But as we've learned over the years, a lot of these genealogy companies have changed their policies, and it makes it tougher for law enforcement to access their database without a subpoena, Major.